Hi, I'm Louise Krikorian, and this is Shaping Our Story, where I talk with exemplary leaders about their passion, purpose, and perseverance to encourage you to thrive. Today, our guest, five-time Grammy-nominated jazz composer and former university professor Chuck Owen, has a career that spans teaching, performing, and creating music at the highest level. From inspiring his students to perform with renowned artists like Ray Charles and Paquito D'Rivera, to encouraging his students to become exemplary leaders in the music industry, working with artists like Dolly Parton and Stevie Wonder. Chuck Owen has been composing jazz music since he was in high school and leads his two ensembles, a big band called the Jazz Surge and his seven-piece group ReSurgence. He has learned from many of his heroes, including Quincy and Chick Corea. Chuck Owen shares his deep commitment to creativity, collaboration, and the lifelong pursuit of music. This episode is all about what fuels his passion and how it continues to evolve and deepen over time. Well, welcome, Chuck Owen. It's so great to see you here. I'm so glad that you agreed to be interviewed for Shaping Our Story.
I'm delighted to be here, Louise. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah. Now, we've talked before. I met you at an event at the Palladium, and that is in St. Pete. And then also I interviewed you for the USF, which is the University of South Florida's oral history program that they have that is online at USF at Digital Commons. And so I was just really happy that you agreed to be interviewed also for my podcast. One of the things that we've talked about in the past is how you are a retired university professor. You're a jazz composer. You have recorded albums, and right now you're recording a new album, so I'd like to talk about that. You have two ensembles. You have a jazz band. You have a seven-piece group. So you have two different ensembles.
Right. They're both jazz bands, but one is just bigger than the other.
One's larger, yes, than the other. And you have performed with world-renowned artists like Nat Adderley. So of all of those pursuits, working with students and then also performing and recording, what would you say is your passion or greatest interest?
Well, I absolutely loved being a professor and working with students. It feels really good. I love, encouraging creativity and seeing that age, particularly the college age. It was so meaningful for my life. And I think it is just such a great transitional time in people's lives. I feel like I can have an impact and encourage them. And I love seeing where they're headed. But at the same time, I think my musical passion has always been around composition. It's mostly jazz composition, but it's kind of varied a little bit. I certainly have influences well outside of jazz that have crept into my music. So that's by retiring from teaching. I'm anything but retired now. I've just switched gears and been able to focus more continuously on my role as a composer and a band leader.
So do you miss working with students?
I do to a certain extent, but I'm very fortunate in that. In touring with my small group, and I also have booked a bunch of lecture tours. And next week, I'm going out and I'm doing a 1-week residency at the University of North Texas. So I'm able to get out to universities and work with students still pretty regularly, actually. And so I get it. I just don't have to deal with all of the other stuff involved in being a university professor, all of the administrative stuff and all that sort of. So it's kind of nice to kind of come in and do a lecture, work with people for a little bit, and then head out.
Yeah, I understand that because I miss working with my students too, now that I'm a retired teacher, but I do have younger people who are aspiring to be the best at what they want to be. And so I'm interviewing them. So I still do get to work with some younger people who are working on becoming someone like you.
Well, be careful.
So it's interesting because when you were in high school, you were in many different bands, but you were specifically in the stage band or the jazz band when you were in high school. And that's when you started writing music. So what I would like to know is, who was the first person who inspired you to compose?
I don't know as much the person that inspired me as much as the opportunity to compose. Uh, um, our band director had a classical background at the time. We just switched band directors, and all of a sudden he came in and said, "I don't want anything to do with the jazz band." He had no use for it. So he said, "You guys can still do it, but you're going to have to lead it yourself." And we had no budget for music or anything. So all of a sudden, if we wanted to play anything that wasn't currently in our library, we had to write it or arrange it ourselves. And there was really only one other person at the time when I jumped in who was doing it at all. I had never done it, but I thought, well, I'd taken classical piano and I knew theory, and so I figured I would jump in there. And I was inspired by. So most of the music we had in the library there was kind of older, kind of swing era sort of music, Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, that sort of stuff, which we enjoyed playing. But we also, were very much inspired by groups like Blood, Sweat, and Tears and Chicago and all those horn bands that were more, they call it jazz rock, but maybe a little bit more rock. But actually, you could see that jazz bands playing that, except that I had never heard anybody doing it. So I would transcribe a bunch of that and then arrange it for the big band. And it really only takes about the first time you sit there and you write music in your own hand and you hand out all the parts, and you have to hand out 20 parts in a big band like that, and they play it, and that sound that comes out is just so inspirational. It's like, oh wow, I did that, and so I was kind of hooked immediately following that, as were a couple of really good friends, and we put together a group on the outside so I started writing for that. But I didn't have a composition teacher or anybody kind of pushing me to write music. I just had an opportunity to write. So I've kept that in mind when I've been teaching too, is to make sure that you can find ways for students to have similar opportunities, to let them go and do what kind of inspires them. I thinking about who is maybe a person that inspired me, because at the time I really didn't know other musicians. I mean, later on, very early, I got really inspired by Quincy Jones. He was a huge influence at North Texas when I was there for an undergraduate. An amazing musician, Lyle Mays, who ended up playing with the Pat Metheny group, was very inspirational in letting me see that you could approach a jazz big band outside of the kind of the traditional norms. That was very inspirational. But you know that the first person that was my hero as a young kid was actually Pete Rose, a baseball player, who did. Why? Was not thinking, we don't think very highly of Pete Rose these days because he had so many personal problems, but he was such a, he was so intense. He so loved the game of baseball. It was transparent. The minute you saw him on the field, he absolutely loved that game. He was not the most talented. He was not the biggest. He was not the fastest. He was not the best. But he worked so hard at it. And they called him Charlie Hustle. He hustled all the time. And I was always a very small person. I never felt I was the most talented or whatever. But I felt like that just through that, with that hard work, with that kind of making sure you love what you're doing and that you just pursue it, to your utmost. That has stayed with me almost my entire life. I've kind of always felt like a little bit like an underdog in some ways. I mean, jazz music is not a big popular music, and so I think I took something from that person in a very non-musical way, but that has stayed with me.
So with Pete Rose, you got to see his passion and his perseverance, and that inspired you to
Right.
persevere.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you also say that you were inspired by Quincy Jones?
Hmm.
And can you tell me more?
Well, Quincy Jones in the 60s had a big bang. This was before he got involved with really pop music. And he came up and he was very traditional. He was wrote for Count Basie and all these great singers. And just, I didn't know this at the time, but when I first ran into him, he had a big band of some of the finest LA studio musicians. And he was writing, again, kind of like what I mentioned Lyle, but he was writing big band music. So in very much jazz big band music, but that was referencing a little bit of what I would listen to on the radio, pop culture and all of that sort of thing. It wasn't doing like Michael Jackson stuff, but it was still kind of pulling it at a lot of kind of rock beats, Latin beats, all of that sort of thing. And these were beautifully produced albums too. So they just sounded great. And I will say I listened to those and I said, I want to do that. I want to, it was kind of mystery as to how he did some of that. But he came from a really strong jazz background and then just created a career that went beyond that. And so that also was very inspirational to me that you could, but it also, it enforced the need for a strong jazz foundation, which I've continued to, as much as I think I've gone beyond that in my own writing, but with students, I think that is a big key for writers is to have that foundation first and then move forward.
So did you work with him or meet him?
No, I've met Quincy much later, but no, I never got to work with him. And I really didn't get to, there's a number of my heroes over the years that I've got to consider friends, and that was not the case with Quincy. I just kind of met him. I had a chance to gawk and be a fanboy for a second, and that was kind of it.
Okay. So I'd like to know more about your other heroes. I'm wondering if your concert tour with Chick Corea, if he was one of your heroes.
Oh, absolutely. Chick was definitely one of my heroes. Both, again, I tend to like musicians that have a really broad musical landscape. And so even though their core maybe as a jazz musician, they have embraced so many other things. And Chick did that when my first, introduction to Chick was with kind of a very pretty heavy jazz rock group, an emphasis on the rock. It was very guitar influenced. But then he went into this gear where he started doing they did an album which I absolutely love called My Spanish Heart, which was very much flamenco-ish and all that sort of thing. I loved seeing all those possibilities. And then I did get to know Chick pretty well over the years, not, the initial tour started that, but then his living near me offered us opportunities to get together. And my only real disappointment was that we were supposed to do a project together. He was going to be on my album, and then he passed away just shortly before that.
That was so sad. He was just too young. Too young. Yeah.
Very definitely.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if in one sentence, this is a challenge for you, Chuck.
It's a big challenge for me. I don't do anything in one sentence.
Could you state your purpose?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess. So I'm already failing at the one sentence thing. I guess I don't. I'm not sure I like the word. It just feels like. I guess if okay, I'll try and answer the question. My purpose, I guess, is to share my vision and kind of ideals with other folks in meaningful ways.
Mm-hmm. So I think that with your music, you move other people.
Well, I hope so. That is definitely, that's very much and I really appreciate it. I mean, I consider it an honor and a joy to be able to share some of my insights with others,
Mm-hmm.
or I say insights, but a lot of it is emotions, and a lot of it is, but there's messages behind a lot of my music, and I don't always know whether that translates or not, but it's I recognize that in many professions, you don't get the chance to do that.
Right.
It's a scary thing to open yourself up and to realize, I'm kind of trying to show people who I am, and they may not like that, or they may
Mm.
not agree, or whatever.
Hmm.
But I more and more I've come to really embrace that aspect of it.
Yeah. Well, as an artist, you are very vulnerable.
Yeah,
You have to just be able to be willing to share
you do. You have to,
yourself.
but
Yeah.
it's a very great privilege to be able to do that too.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that really was interesting in that how strong your music influenced where you were is that when you were in a recording studio and you were recording a song called Sparks Fly, and sparks were actually flying on the roof,
Yeah,
and you had to be
yeah,
evacuated from the.
we did. Yeah, no.
That's strong.
Yeah, studio owner came in right in the middle of the cut and said, "You guys need to get out of here. The fire department's on its way." And
Yeah.
I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Well, we don't know for sure, but there's arcing on the roof. There's sparks coming off." And I said, "We are recording a tune called Sparks Fly right now. I don't
Yeah.
think it has anything to do with it, but you never know." um, yeah, that was
So
very odd.
yeah, I wouldn't consider that a failure at all because you just kind of you took the time to go get dinner. The crew just kind of hung out outside. But in speaking of failures, and you might not like that word either, but what would you consider your biggest professional failure, and then what did you learn from it?
Um, yeah, again, you're kind of right. I'm not a particular fan of the word failure, but and then maybe that's the wrong way to put it, is I think failure happens all the time. It does in my profession.
Mm,
You have to be willing to risk that, and it's a great learning tool. It's maybe the best learning tool. And I don't know that I can't cite a single place. I don't consider that situation a failure.
yeah.
It's a challenge, and I will say that I think sometimes people kind of get those two terms mixed up. The challenges are enormous in the jazz world, and trying to, especially in this day and age, it's just there are so many impediments along the way that you have to be willing to encounter those, and to kind of
Mm,
hurdle them. Failure is a little bit different thing, but I've had any number of times when I've written for a band, and you go and you hear a piece of music and you say, "Oh my gosh, that's not what I intended." So you go back and you immediately look and so what did I do? Well, and so you change something. Honestly, I think there's probably not a piece of music I've written or recorded that I would go back and not consider certain points in those failures, that didn't achieve what I wanted it to do. I could have
mhm,
done that better. But the word implies something that I don't like. I mean, I see those as learning things, and then you grow from that. And so
mhm.
rather than being, it's like, oh my gosh, so I guess I think putting myself out there, the biggest failures is when I haven't been willing to put myself out there. And I can't, again, think of a single thing, but I think that's probably the biggest failure, is when all of a sudden fear gets hold of you and you say, I'm just not gonna, I don't think that's gonna work, or whatever, and you don't try. That's a failure. Um,
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. So, do you think that composing comes easily to you or comes naturally?
no, to this very minute, absolutely not. Um, and maybe it's because I'm always trying to kind of do something a little bit different. I'm certainly much more comfortable with aspects. I've been doing this a very long, long time now. And so
Hmm.
there's certain things that were challenges for me early in my career that I don't even think about now. That's
Mm,
and again, I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, but I've known composers who, once they get to a certain level, a comfort level, that's what they write for the rest of their lives. And then I think that that does come easy to them. I've always tried to push myself to do something different, which
mhm,
means that I'm going to be uncomfortable. And I think that's a good
mm.
place to be, honestly. And that sets you up for those occasional little failures because in those positions, you're trying something new, you may not nail it right on,
Mhm.
but then you learn from that and you go on.
Yeah.
Uh,
But I
but
think you have an aptitude for it because when you were in high school, as you said, the band director didn't want to do it anymore, and
right,
there wasn't anybody else around, maybe one other student to write. So in some sense, it does come naturally to you because you were able to think in your head, okay, let me look at another composer's work. Let me look at the sheet music, which is
right.
what I'm assuming that you did, and then you took that music and then you transposed it to another piece of blank sheet music and you started writing out the notes and you created your own arrangement. And not everybody thinks that way.
No,
So,
and I recognize that, and I did get so in addition to my own feeling of that's so great to hear that music coming back at me, we would play it in concerts, and people would come and say, I love that piece, and
mhm,
that was that was the musical version of crack. You'd get that, and then people would say that, and so it did it. It was very encouraging. And even the band director who hated what we were doing said that was just you've got a talent for this, and you should
right.
kind of pursue it.
Yeah.
And I think it's really easy for people to say. I don't know that it was so much as a talent as it was just I did have certain tools that allowed me to do it, and I
Hmm.
had the desire to do it, and I the will to keep on trying it. And but without occasional affirmations along the way, people saying that it's really good, that it would be easy to kind of say, "Oh, well, I'm done with this."
Yeah.
And so all along the way, I felt I was getting enough positive feedback that all the negative stuff I could kind of just okay, shove it aside, move on. Um,
Right. So it's interesting that you work with some phenomenal musicians. In your band, you consider it to be your family. And I know that you work with some exemplary musicians like Mark Neuenschwander, who's worked with Andrea Bocelli. So I'm wondering what keeps you inspired because you're working with so many amazing musicians. Is the music inspiring you? People? What is it?
Absolutely. I mean, again, this is not something I recognized at the time, but when I was early in my career. But one of the greatest, I'll call it a benefit. That's probably not the right word. One of the greatest joys of in working in the business I'm in is the opportunity to be surrounded by so many other creative people, and that jazz is really great for that. And you try and find ways as a writer to open the door for people to be creative, to have their own voice, because they're all great at this. And yeah, they are a family, and I just absolutely love being surrounded, and they inspire me every day in every way. But I'm also inspired by the opportunity to write and kind of live inside of here, and that's very solitary. So it's a
Hmm.
very, I
Yeah.
I live a very bifurcated life. I don't see a soul for months on end while I'm writing, and then I go in. I'm surrounded by people. It's whether it's
Mm.
musicians or the audience or whatever, nonstop, and I kind of like having that dual existence.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting that I had mentioned at the very beginning that I know that you're working on a new album.
Mhm.
So can you just say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm real excited about it. I am still writing, although I would say probably it's about three-fourths of the way written at this point in time. And we record in about another 5 months, I guess, or something like that, and tour a little bit before that. So, um, yeah, this will be the eighth. I think that's right. Eighth album with my Jazz Surge, and it's our 30th anniversary. So I can't wait to get back in the studio with them. It's going to be, because it's the 30th anniversary, I've kind of looked at it as bringing folks together and then trying to tie up some. in above all of this stuff. So I'm actually going to be probably releasing a best of along with the new album too. Some of and that'll be on vinyl. But the music I like the piece I'm finishing up right now. There's a series of pieces I've done that were all kind of based on tech. I'm not always inspired by technical innovations. But so this one is taking it and looking at AI, but it's going to have the same kind of title. So it's going to be a series that kind of wraps up here. I'm bringing back several guest artists that have performed and recorded with us in the past. Randy Brecker will be joining us again. Gregoire Murray, they were both on the album 2 albums ago, and appeared with us when we played at Birdland in New York. Randy's played with us on a number of other occasions too. Bringing back Warren Wolf, who was on my very last album on Vibes. He's an amazing Vibes player, so he'll be back. But then I'm also bringing in Terry Lynn Carrington on drums, and Terry Lynn worked with me on a project in Germany, but has never played with the Surge before. So there's a lot of things coming together from previous projects, but also some new stuff. And the other new thing is for the first time I'm using vocals. I work with Kate McGarry, a just wonderful vocalist in my small group, but I've never had her sing with the big band. So she'll be joining us. But I'm also going to be bringing in at least 2, maybe a few more vocalists to join. So I've never done that before either. So it'll feel like a reunion, but there'll be a lot of new stuff too.
Mm-hmm. Great. I know that you also take a lot of pride in your former students who are now succeeding across the music industry, like Bob Thompson, who's president of Wise Music Group, and he's worked with Dolly Parton and Stevie Wonder. So I'm curious, what is your advice for someone starting their own journey?
It's a kind of a combination of what I mentioned a little bit before is make sure you've got the foundations of whatever you're doing, covered and really strong. I see a lot of students kind of wanting to shortcut that process, and that usually comes back to bite them. I understand the desire to do something new, to be themselves, and that's the big important second step. But having that foundation is really important. So learning from the masters and understanding what they're doing and is really important. But then the second thing is then to kind of get away from that and allow yourself to reflect on who you are, what you value, and not get trapped by the norms or whatever you consider that to be. Sometimes people get the foundations down and they feel like, okay, these are the guidelines. This is where I have to stay between, and I think that's. Nobody wants to hear. We had John Coltrane. He was amazing. People want to hear somebody maybe that John Coltrane influenced, but that's their own self. They don't need to hear John Coltrane again. They don't need to hear Maria Schneider's compositions they need to hear whoever that person is very uniquely expressed. Mm-hmm. And that's going to include all sorts of different influences. And that's what's going to make it fresh and intrigue people.
Mm-hmm. And you write consistently every day, don't you?
Pretty much, especially when I'm working on projects. It's one of my kind of mantras it's another teaching point, is that people look at composers, I think all creative folks in many ways. And I think people in non-creative professions, that's probably a poor way of saying it, but they kind of assume that there's these ideas or germs of ideas that kind of fall like manna from heaven at some times, and you just wait for those moments of inspiration, and then you write. And that's the key to failure right there, is you need to show up every day and write. And it rarely, those big giant inspirations do happen, but it happen infrequently. And most of the time it's just a matter of working, and you keep at it day in and day out. So yeah, I've become pretty good at that. I keep fairly regular hours. You kind of have to learn when you're the most creative and trying to clear that time.
Right.
So,
Well, I would like to encourage our listeners to go to your website, which is Chuck Owen, ChuckOwen.com, to find out more about you. I know I'm also going to include your Instagram account, your Facebook account, and your YouTube channels, so that our listeners can take a look and a listen to learn more about you. And I really appreciate your time and your inspiration, because you inspire me.
oh, well, thank you so much. It's been great to do this. And yeah, I would love for people to check out some of my music, and whether, YouTube is a great way of doing that, but it's also available on all the streaming services too, so they can get it,
Right.
Spotify or
Good.
those others.
Great. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Okay, great. Thanks, Louise. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Connect with Chuck Owen on Facebook, Chuck Owen. Follow him on Instagram at Chuck Owen 54, and subscribe on YouTube. Just search Chuck Owen. Explore the links in the show notes to learn more about the 4-day tour before the band enters the studio to record its 8th album. And mark your calendar for the Jazz Surge's 30th anniversary Florida concert tour, a special 4-day event happening in September 2026. Thank you for joining us at Shaping Our Story, and thanks to our guest, Chuck Owen, whose ability to consistently show up every day and do the hard work, no matter how difficult, is proof that he combines his passion with perseverance. If you enjoyed this week's episode, click on follow and leave a comment to inspire us or to suggest a guest. And remember, if this made you think, please share the thought with a friend. See you next time.